Good evening. It's so lovely to see you here for the launch of this novel, Red Haven. And I must say, I'm delighted and proud to be joined by the author of the book, Mette McLeod on the cover. I hope you're getting a glass of wine if you're here in the room. If you're at home, I hope you've got whatever you prefer to have in front of you on a Saturday evening. We are going to have a bit of a discussion of the book. We're going to hear a little extract from it, hear a bit about what led to it and what it's all about, and people here in the room can ask some questions if they like. If you're lucky enough to be here with us in Bergen, this is one of the very few places you can buy a physical copy of the book, and if you're nice to the author, she may be willing to sign it for you. Those at home can buy it on Amazon, whether in ebook or physical format, so do feel free to do that as well. Without further ado, should we get started?
Yes.
About 10 years ago, and this is one reason why I feel proud to be here, is this is something that's been long in the genesis. We were in San Francisco, and you had the idea for this book, and you decided that you wanted to pitch the book at an event called Pitchapalooza. This is an event where you have some industry people, agents, publishers, and so on, sitting on a panel, and a whole series of people get a minute to pitch their idea for a book to this panel of experts. And so you and I were discussing what the pitch would be for this book. You'd been thinking about it for a little while, and the idea was it needs to be something meets something else. And so you told me it needs to be Miss Marple meets Jason Bourne. So would you like to expand on that and tell us what it means for a book to be the meeting of Miss Marple and Jason Bourne?
Well, I grew up reading all these action thrillers and partly political international thrillers with Le Carré, Robert Ludlum, Ken Follett, Young Guillaume, and they only had male protagonists. It was always the men who went around saving the world. And then obviously I read a lot of Agatha Christie, as you do, and before that, Nancy Drew. And I was like, why is she not there? Why isn't there like a Miss Marple, but who's actually the action version? So I wanted to write that book, partly because I have met some really amazing women who could be that person. And I wanted her to appear in fiction so that girls growing up could see that a girl could do that just as well as all the male protagonists in these novels. So it was partly that, and yeah, I really liked Agatha Christie when I grew up. I think I've read all of her books. I don't remember them all, but I have read them all.
So to give us a flavour of the book, when you hear it's X meets Y, you know it's going to be somewhere situated in the genre universe. Can you say what kind of books inspired it and where you think it fits into the whole world?
Well, I really like these things where books where things happen really fast, when there was a lot of action and I could read them fast and I'd get really entertained and they just sucked me in, and I wanted to do something like that, but also to have a little bit of that of slightly, not literary so much in the writing, but literary in the sense of getting to know the characters a bit more. And I also wanted the people, I wanted the antagonist to be someone you could understand. Because having worked as a journalist abroad, I've met so many people that do things that people think is absolutely atrocious. But if you want to understand why they do them, you need to kind of understand where they come from and why they do it. And that's partly why I made my antagonist the way I did.
So understanding where they come from is obviously important. The book evokes a strong sense of place, especially in its scenes set in Moscow. And obviously that draws on your own experience there. You were the correspondent for Aftenposten for 2 years in 2007 and 2008 in Moscow. You went there as a young journalist who was suddenly going to have the responsibility for all of your newspaper's coverage of Russia, Central Asia, North Caucasus, Belarus, Ukraine. It was a lot to take on. Can you talk about how it felt to go out there on your own at that age?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think maybe I was young enough to just think it was exciting. But also, I'd been to Russia only once before. I'd studied Russian before in the army. And I then went on to work for the intelligence service, so I wasn't allowed to go to Russia. So I had this knowledge of Russia and wanting to know more and wanting to go there, and I couldn't for a long time. And then when I could, I went to see a friend who worked at the embassy in Moscow, and I went to St. Petersburg. And I think it was probably my first day there, I thought, well, I'm just going to be brave. I'm just going to go and I'm going to walk all around town. And I walked, they've got these really, really long roads because it's all planned. It's massive, long roads. And I thought, this looks like the road I'm going to, so I'm just going to walk. I know it's half an hour to walk, but I'll just keep walking. And after half an hour, I realized it's not where I'm going. So I'd been walking for half an hour, quite fast, and I was going in the wrong direction. And I felt a little bit silly, so I didn't want to just turn around and walk back, so I crossed the road. And that's when I noticed the two men that had actually been following me the whole time. And I thought, okay, I sort of had expected that. Having the background I had, I thought they probably would be paying attention. I didn't expect them to have two guys following me around the whole time. But at that point, I just decided, if it's going to be like this, I might as well just acknowledge that's what it's going to be like if I'm in Russia, and just ignore it. And I'm not going to look over my shoulder the whole time because I'd get paranoid, and I don't want that. But getting to work there as a journalist was it was such an opportunity, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. But it was also really hard work because there were so many things that were happening. There were several countries with lots of really, really important things happening, and having to cover all of the big political stuff, and also trying to give an idea of what actually normal people think, what regular people think, why they act in the way they do, why they vote the way they do, or they don't vote at all. Trying to capture all of that, it took a lot of time, and there wasn't much time for us.
How did you choose what you were going to cover?
It was in conversations with the editor, and he was quite, if I was in doubt, then he would often make the decision. If I was certain what was the best option, then they would often trust me because I was the one who was looking at everything there and then.
So Redhaven, it's a fiction book, but the kind of instigating events of it and the underlying sort of mystery is based on real things that happened and people's theories about real things that happened. Can you describe a little bit what those real things are that bring the book to life? Well,
there are so many conspiracy theories and stories that go around. You'd never know quite what to trust. But one of the things I heard about was this is real. There was a man after the coup in 1991 who supposedly fell out a window. It's quite a standard KGB way of getting rid of someone. They fall out of a window, no one knows who did it, or if he did it by himself. But he fell out of the window, but that wasn't the interesting thing. The interesting thing was that he was in charge, or at least quite heavily involved with the investments of the Soviet Union abroad. So what secrets he took with him, we don't really know. And I think a lot of the money was brought back to Russia in the 90s, but I'm not sure if anyone knows if everything was found. And that is my idea in this one, that what if there was some investments that weren't on file, that he was the only one who knew about, and where are they now? Is there an account somewhere? Is there a company somewhere that is immensely wealthy and has no owner?
So to give a bit more of a flavour of it, I think it's time that we hear from the book. So would you like to read us something?
Yeah. So my protagonist, Aurora, she is a child recovery expert. That means she goes and she tries to find and brings back children who have been kidnapped. In this case, takes her to Moscow, where a small boy has gone missing. And the only lead she has so far is a Russian politician called Sorokin. Sorokin is Russian for the magpie. And she has discovered that his favourite haunt is a casino, a very posh casino that she somehow needs to get into so that she can talk to him. The cars arrived in pairs, a shiny sports car, maybe a Porsche or a Ferrari, with a rich man and his beautiful companion leading the way, followed by a black 4x4 carrying men with short cropped hair, the barrels of submachine guns visible in the windows. Oligarchs, or corrupt politicians and bureaucrats. They were often one and the same these days. The two doormen standing outside Casino Mitrofan looked as though they were hewn from granite, their suits taut at the shoulders. This was, according to her research, Sorokin's favourite night spot. Guns not allowed, it said on the sign by the door. There were enough in the parking lot to start a small war. It made Rory think of Tom again, wondering if he was even still alive. She shrugged the thought away and focused her attention on the doorman, walking between the parked sport cars so the bouncers wouldn't know that she had arrived in a Renault. They watched her as she approached, glancing towards her hands. She had put on a fake sapphire and diamond ring, wanting to give the impression of being a rich man's wife, not someone who was looking for one. As she walked towards the door in her red-soled Louboutins, confidence fragile as an eggshell, the door was open from inside. "Are you a member?" The woman in an elegant black evening gown just inside asked her in Russian, knowing the answer already. "No, just visiting for the evening," Rory replied in the Queen's English. As she reached into her purse and found her platinum credit card, making sure that the room key to the Golden Ring Hotel was out of sight. "I see." The woman looked Rory up and down, paused a little at her bling ring, and then again at her shoes. At least one of them were real. "This way, madam." The woman led her to a small room to the side where an almost identical-looking woman sat behind thick bulletproof glass. Rory saw her precious platinum card, the one card Dick had let her have her own name on. He didn't have much choice on that one. Put through an old-fashioned manual credit card imprint machine. With perfectly manicured fingers, the cashier wrote $50,000 in the amount box and slid the imprint through the slot for Rory to sign. The minimum buy-in. Rory felt a cold sweat breaking out. That was a year's salary for her, when she'd had a job. She forced a smile and signed the paper, thanking God that they hadn't become so modern that they did an online credit check. "Tatiana will take you to the cash desk for your chips." Rory followed the first woman up the marble staircase and into a red hallway where a gold-plated icon hung at the end. Before the revolution, this had been a nobleman's house, and it was one of the few that had been restored to perfection after the end of the Soviet Union. Only the discreet metal detectors by the entrance to the main room detracted from the old-world atmosphere. As Rory made her way into the ballroom, trying to look graceful in her too high heels, she scanned the room. The walls were covered with old mirrors, which made it look a lot bigger than it was. The ceiling was decorated with a beautiful fresco depicting a pair of cupids firing their arrows at the people below. I'm going to stop there.
Hopefully that gave you an idea of it. So this location, this casino, the frescoed ceiling, the mirrored walls, it's one of those times where you've taken something that's real and that you know personally and turned it into something fictional. It's not really a casino. Do you want to tell us a bit about where that location comes from?
Yes, the real location is actually the Norwegian embassy in Moscow. It's one of those few places that have actually been restored to perfection. It's absolutely beautiful, built by, and the name of the casino in my book is Casino Mitrofan. It was the owner originally was Mitrofan Grachov, and it became the Norwegian embassy after the Second World War because of the results of the war. Germany had, after their invasion in Soviet Union, then both the Soviet Union and Norway decided, well, let's swap embassies. So the German embassy in Oslo became the Russian one, or the Soviet Union one, and the German embassy in Moscow became the Norwegian one. So Norway has this absolutely amazing building that a small country like us normally wouldn't have. And it's one of the few buildings in Moscow that really has been restored beautifully, and it's been kept, and it's been made into, like, it's a piece of cultural history of Russia, and I just wanted to use it because it's beautiful, and I think that part of Russia should be shown. Because so much of what they're doing today is when they preserve a building, they keep the front of it and they tear down the rest and make everything modern, and I wanted this in my book as well, in real life.
So you converted it into a casino in the book, and you set a scene which we're just building up to in the extract that you just read there. It gets very exciting and tense in the moments that follow, when we meet Sorokin, the big bad guy, in the moments after this. And another of the things that you kind of mixed in here that you wouldn't necessarily think is real, but may in fact be, is that Sorokin is accompanied by this rather striking female bodyguard, and I think that you've even met people a bit like that.
Yes, this is one of the few people in my book who's actually genuinely based on just one person. And it is a female bodyguard I interviewed in Moscow. She doesn't look like her, she probably doesn't act like her, but they're not common, but they are quite popular. And there's a fair amount of women in Russia with special skills in that sense. And they are very good when you want to keep a low-key surveillance, when you don't need to show off that you've got bodyguards, but when you actually, your main priority is to keep safe and to keep your wife safe or keep your children safe. She can look at she looks like the friend, she looks like the nanny, she goes skiing with you, no one knows that you actually have protection there, but she will keep you safe. And she would have also broken my hand if she tried. It was the firmest handshake I've ever had.
So Rory Conroy, your main character, she's a young woman navigating what is, in many respects in the book, a man's world, and she encounters many of the challenges that people face in those circumstances. She isn't any one person, but can you tell us about some of the people that have inspired her?
Oh, there's lots of them. Both as a journalist and both working in being in the army and afterwards. I've met so many women doing absolutely amazing, brave, strong things and making decisions that I would be too afraid to make, like the human rights campaigners in Russia and especially in Chechnya, like the journalist I covered when I was in Mexico who was covering the drug war. I went there, I came for 2 days, I left again, and this female photographer I followed for those 2 days, she lives there the whole time. That was murder capital of the world at the time, and there's a lot of these women that take decisions that can affect their lives, and they still do them because they believe what they do is the right thing to do and it's important to do it, and they think they're the one that should be doing it.
You also have an antagonist called Dmitri, and he's, genuinely a scary antagonist. When Rory comes into contact with him, then you fear for her life. But we actually spend a lot of time with him in the book, and we get to know him a bit. And we start. I'm not the only one who's read it who's ended up feeling quite sympathetic towards Dmitri, no matter all of the bad stuff he's done. How is it that you've come to write such a sympathetic bad guy?
I think it's because my main job when I was there, and I always feel that's important, not just as a journalist, but other times as well. It's not, people aren't bad, and they don't do things that they think are bad. People make the decisions based on what they think is best for them and their loved ones. And I think I've met patriots in a lot of countries, and like part of him is based on 2 American policemen I interviewed when I was just before I went to Mexico, who initially were a bit dismissive of this young female journalist who came to talk to them about drugs. And then when I mentioned I'd been in the army, they completely changed. It's like suddenly it was all about patriotism, about giving everything for your country, and that patriotism, it's something I've seen as strongly in both in the US and in Russia. And if you believe that what you're doing is what is best for you and your loved ones and your people, then you're doing things that other people might feel that is reprehensible, but you still do them. And I think that's quite important. I mean, everyone has a mother, and even the worst people in the world probably love their mother. And I think that's quite...
And we do meet the mother in the book, and she's very sympathetic too.
Yeah.
What this leads Dimitri to, what he actually gets up to, is he organises deaths. He arranges for people to die in such a way that no one knows that he was ever there. And it's one of those fantastic things that you read in fiction or you see in movies, but maybe it's not just fiction, maybe it's real. Are there any examples of things like that have actually happened?
There's too many examples of that happening. And it's not just Russia who does this. Obviously, other countries do it too, but in Europe, Russia does it quite a lot. Or maybe not Russia, but individuals within the establishment make these things happen. And people fall off roofs, they die of heart attacks, they supposedly kill themselves, they drown in their baths, or they get shot on the street, or they get poisoned with Novichok, or there's so many...
There are car accidents.
There are car accidents, there are car bombs, they just go missing. There are so many ways that you can make it happen. And some of them are made to happen because you just want to get rid of someone. That is just a bit too bothersome. Some of them are made to set an example, to show others that this is what happens to you if you don't stop. So there's a whole mix of things like, we're doing this to set an example. So we're not going to even hide that we're doing this. And then there's all the other cases where they're just it's a bit underhand, and we make it happen. We make someone die, but you can't prove that anyone did it. They're not always very good at it, though. And I think obviously my guy is very good at it. But there's a mix between people who are very skilled and people who just get a bit too
Are we thinking
lazy,
Salisbury
maybe?
here?
Yes, maybe.
Salisbury
Probably.
Cathedral and going to see the famous spire.
Going to see the spire, and the two men who ended up being, looking like you. So they tried to assassinate someone on British ground, or they were gay men looking at phallic symbols in Britain. Yep. I don't know which one they think is worse.
So the prologue of the book takes place in this kind of pivotal moment in history where, Soviet Russia is dying and a new Russia is being born. Most of the action takes place a few decades later in what that country had become, in Putin's Russia. And we see characters who are kind of part of the state apparatus, characters who are in organized crime, and characters who are occupying a sort of a grey zone in between. And I'm curious what you're trying to tell us about the way that things work in modern day Russia.
Well, I don't know who coined it, but the term seriously organised crime is pretty apt. It is very well organised, and it's highly controlled by a lot of state entities, and corruption is endemic. It's everywhere. At least when I was there, the most desirable line of study was to become a bureaucrat, because then you get to put the stamp on things, and if you control the stamp, then people pay you to use it. And you pay for everything. You pay the teachers, you pay the people like doing your exam, you pay to give birth at the hospital, you pay for a burial spot, you pay when you get stopped by the traffic police, even though you haven't done anything wrong, just because it's easier to do that and get over with. So it's just pervasive. It soaks through everything. But at the same time, then people are just trying to get by and trying to do the best they can for themselves and their families. And you kind of understand that they don't trust the state, because twice in the 90s, like the ruble collapsed, all their money lost value. They had nothing. So you can understand that they want to make sure that they provide for themselves in the best way possible. But yeah, it's It's very well organized. And that's one of the reasons, actually, when I was there, knowing that they probably paid attention to me, knowing that from time to time, maybe I was followed, I don't know, because I deliberately stopped looking, then I did feel quite safe. Because if something was going to happen to me, then it wouldn't be an accident. It would have been planned. And I didn't really have the time to really go in depth in the big corruption stories. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the resources. I was there covering 10 different countries. So there was only so much I can do. So I didn't do the dangerous, scary things that people end up getting injured for, or getting killed for, or getting sued for.
I think it's such a different place. I think, growing up and living in Western liberal democracies is not necessarily easy to appreciate what it might be like in a place like Russia. And it's difficult also to explain it. So without wanting to denigrate anybody's work, what do you think's missing in kind of Western narratives about what Russia's like today?
I think it's what's missing. It is what I struggled with when I was there as well. There's all these big political stories. There's all this democracy isn't there, and there's corruption, and a lot of bad things are happening. But it's very difficult to get the human stories in there and what most people's lives are like, because it doesn't create headlines. But it's really important, if you want to understand Russia, you need to understand what people think and what they talk about when they're at home. Right. And I realise, I appreciate how difficult it is to get that across, and how difficult it is to get space to tell those stories. But if you want to understand Russia, you can't just talk about Putin.
Yeah. If you do turn on the news now and see something about Russia, the likelihood is that it's going to be covering what's happening to Alexei Navalny. And I'm wondering, to what extent is what he's going through emblematic of the way that the state is operating at the moment?
Well, it seems like quite a standard operating procedure. They tried and possibly failed to kill him with poison, and I don't know why they let him go to Germany. I'm not really sure why they did that. They didn't have to, but they chose to do that. And I also don't really know, I can understand that he chose to go back because he sees it as his purpose, and it's important that he did go back. But then again, no one can stop them from sending him to a prison camp, and no one can get him out of there. And if you look at the history of both Soviet Union and Russia, well, not really Russia, but Soviet Union, then sending people, political dissidents, to a prison camp was standard procedure. Some of them came back, but a lot of them didn't. And it's a lot easier to get away with him dying from tuberculosis in a prison camp than it is to get away with having poisoned him and people knowing that you did it. If he dies from tuberculosis, it's not a surprise because it's endemic in the prison system in Russia. And there could be many other reasons. Khodorkovsky did get out, but who knows how that happened? How much money actually changed hands? Did anything change hands? I don't know. Those things you don't really hear about that, but it's a standard thing. I met dissidents in Russia who'd been to prison camps, and it's just they knew it was going to happen. There's one guy in St. Petersburg. He was like, well, he'd been told that he had to appear at the interview, so he came. He was going to go to the interview with the KGB, then the KGB, and and he was like, okay, I just need to change your clothes and bring a bit of cheese and a bit of ham or something, something to eat. Because he might just be sent away straight away. But the last time, then he just ran away. He ran to Georgia to get away from it all. But it's a
bit like that TV show that they had, Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, because the winners of the TV show are going to get sent on holiday, but you go to the interview, don't forget your cheese and ham because you might get sent to a prison camp.
Yes.
We're running out of time.
Yes.
That's why I cut you off. Sorry. I'm going to ask two things really quickly. If anyone's interested to learn more about this place and what's going on there at the moment, what should they be reading?
There's really just one book I want to recommend right now, and that's a non-fiction book written by Catherine Belton. And she has done the brave things that I both probably didn't have the bravery to do, but also I didn't have the time or the resources to do. And she's written an amazing account of how Putin and the people around him actually came to acquire all the things they have, and both of power and resources, money, everything. And it's extremely well sourced, and she has done amazing work with it. So amazing that she's now being sued by 4 of the oligarchs that she has talked about in the book. I think it's 4 of them. And that's the kind of thing they will do if you do step too far. I didn't have to make the decision whether or not I should do that when I was in Moscow, because I didn't have the time or the resources to do it. She has taken the time to do it, and I admire her bravery for doing it. But yeah, I wish the Western legal system was a little bit more prepared for these kinds of things happening, because we have a lot of basic trust, and we take it for granted that kind of the values we uphold should be the general values. But when people come from other countries, it's so easy to take advantage of it. And especially in Norway, the level of trust is obscenely high. And people trust the government almost all the time. It takes a lot to make you distrust what they say. Britain, it's slightly lower, I think. Yeah, it's lower, but it's nowhere near as low as it is in Russia. So it's very easy to to try to exploit those systems, and just get away with saying things that just blatantly aren't true. And yeah, I wish more people were aware of how those things can be exploited and are being exploited, and people should buy her book.
Genuinely briefly this time, back to Red Haven. What's next for Aurora Conroy?
The next book is in a completely different location. Same character and same job, in the sense that she needs to find a missing child, which we haven't even talked about. That's what's happening in this one. She's looking for a missing child.
She's looking for a missing child.
But it's a different political setting, and it's set in California, and I'm not going to say too much about it, but the politics are interesting.
So do we need to, you lived in Russia and wrote a book about that. The next one's in San Francisco, where we lived as well. Does that mean there's a book about Bergen somewhere in the pipeline?
It could well be.
Good.
Yeah. I don't know what the great political scheme is going to be here, but we'll think of something.
It's not quite so dramatic here, is it?
Yeah.
Great. We have run out of time, so thank you so much for joining us for this at home as well. All that's left to do is to thank and appreciate the fantastic author of this book. That's it.
Thank you.